Thai boxing. Thai boxing. Come see the Thais, watch how they fight with just everything. Their hands and feet and bows and knees. This is an art of boxing you would all love to learn. Ooh-ah.
Hey guys, welcome to the Eight Limbs podcast. I have a special episode for you today. I'm joined by Sylvie Von Duuglas-Ittu, the most prolific foreigner in Thailand. She has a record of 170, 73, and 10. How are you doing today, Sylvie?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. I wanted to get started by asking you a little bit about your background. So how did you get into Muay Thai and what drove you to really pursue the dream and move to Thailand and get started with the Muay Thai library that you're doing?
That seems like a really linear question, and it's not. The way that I first got into Muay Thai is I was actually introduced to it through my husband, who watched a lot of kung fu movies. And so I actually first saw it on film, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was just so beautiful. And I didn't grow up doing any kind of martial arts or anything like that. I played soccer as a kid. I was pretty active. I grew up in Colorado. But I didn't have any kind of contact sport background. But we were living in Bear Mountain, which is up by West Point in New York, in a cabin. It was like not near anything. So when it was decided that I wanted to actually try Muay Thai and like find where to train Muay Thai, it was really hard to find a place to learn it. And ultimately we ended up in a Thai man who goes by Master K, who was about 69 years old when I met him. He's in his 80s now. But he was teaching people out of his basement in New Jersey, and I would drive an hour in each direction to do a little bit of work with Master K a few times a week. And then to make the question you asked linear when it was not linear, is it just kind of swallowed my life. I loved it so much that it was like, how do we get more of Master K? And so I was going to see him more often and then training myself in the woods. And then he actually had angioplasty. He had a heart operation, and it kind of the reality of understanding that he was not permanent, that nothing's permanent. We felt like we really needed to come to Thailand and experience Muay Thai from its motherland. And then once you see that, you're bitten, and you just we were like, we have to move here. So it was kind of like a snowballing effect of how Muay Thai has kind of taken over my life from when I was first introduced to it. But yeah, it's just been like a gradual everything about my life becoming about Muay Thai over the past, 12 years or so.
Right. And you've had the opportunity to train with and document countless legends of the sport. How was that process of kind of getting the rapport with those guys, and especially as someone from the West and a woman, how was that process? Was it difficult?
There are difficulties in it, but given what it is, it's shockingly not difficult. In terms of if you were looking at it from the outside, how easy do you think it would be to go take a private session from Mike Tyson and become his friend and have him start texting at 2 a.m? That seems pretty insane. But in Thailand, that kind of shockingly has become my reality, where I have multiple legends texting me throughout the night and calling me and asking me questions and to translate something for them. Or me bothering them late into the night, asking them about their records, or how much they weighed in at when they were fighting this other legend.
Guys like Izanoi and Gensak and Karaha invested in your fights. It's amazing.
It's like having a bat phone in my house. They're calling me. But the way that started was actually weirdly similar to my training with Master K, in that I'm the most documented fighter probably in history, because I've been documenting myself from the beginning. And it was not really a project of ego in like I really wanted to show how amazing I was, but rather I knew that a lot of people would never have the kind of experience that I was having of being able to train with someone like Master K. And he packed so much into each session, I could not, from the level I was at and the understanding I had, I could not digest it. So I was filming it for myself to be able to understand it better, and then publishing it for everyone else because people don't get that experience. And it's kind of that same ethic, I think, that led me to the Preserve the Legacy project of training with legends of Muay Thai. Not only to preserve the technique of Muay Thai, which is changing so fast in Thailand, like it's disappearing really, really fast from what it was in the golden age, and these men who have that technique and knowledge in their bodies, but also the men themselves. Like I could talk to you forever about what diesel noise like, but you really have to see it. It's hard to describe. And then someone like Samson Isan, who you watch his fights and he's just this Terminator, like just this endless Terminator. He's so scary. When you meet him in person, he's in his 40s, but he acts like he's 12. Like, we were at a cremation ceremony for Siri Moncon, who's from the Silver Age, and Samson was just kind of like running around, like how your nephew would be like running around a funeral or something. He's very sweet. So it's I don't want to have to describe that in some book somewhere. I want people to actually be able to see that in the way that he actually teaches and shows his techniques. And he's a taxi driver. He's not actually a trainer. So, preserving his technique is actually a very unique endeavor because he's not in a gym somewhere.
Right. And it's so important with Muay Thai, like with these other sports, boxing, kickboxing, and everything. There's so much access to the legends of the sport. They're doing a lot of interviews in English. There's so much film of them, but Muay Thai is severely underdocumented, and I feel like it's a very important, almost ethnographic project that you're doing, where there's nowhere else you can see this.
Yeah, I think very early on, Diesel Noi was one of the first legends that we put in the Muay Thai library. And I remember someone from maybe Australia, like someone who'd known about him for a really, really long time because their teacher had been talking about him. There's not a lot of footage of Diesel Noi from his fighting. There's just not in the world very much footage of Diesel Noi, but everyone has this, like, he's almost like the Sasquatch of Muay Thai in the way that people talk about him. Like they saw him this one time, or they used to read about him in the newspaper or something. And this person, after they saw one of the early Muay Thai library sessions with him, were talking about how incredible it was that they could see him now, like showing his technique now as a person rather than just some like highlight reel kind of thing. And as much as there's, interviews and more documentation in English of like Western boxing, I would love to see some like, in the gym Frazier showing somebody something. There's a video that my husband just cut together of Duran showing like inside punching, like very, very close range boxing, which doesn't exist in Western boxing anymore now.
Yeah.
And it's informal, like it's just in a gym. He's just showing somebody, and it's like, God, that's cool. Like, why is there not tons of that on YouTube? Like, that's so cool. Yeah.
You've spoken a lot about the differences between like the Western training style and the Thai training style, especially with pad work. I've always found that in a lot of the MMA and kickboxing gyms that have been around in the West, that the pad work is very rote, and they're not doing like the kind of light sparring thing that Thais are. And a lot of kickboxers and MMA fighters and Western strikers kind of have trouble with stuff like navigating the ring with rhythm and that, because they aren't really developing it as much. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the way that Thais do pad work, because I've always found that it seems a lot more natural and resembling of what you'd actually do in fights.
I think even that is changing now fast. Gyms are becoming more Western friendly because that's one way to pay bills if you aren't earning entirely off of your fighters and things like that. So I think that I'll call it an influence. I don't want it to sound like we're like ruining Muay Thai or something, but the influence of Western pedagogy and the way that we like to learn and the way that we like to do things is definitely influencing the way the more traditional pedagogy of Muay Thai is being carried out now. I think that I want my trainer to show me a technique or show me a combination. Westerners love combinations. Show me the combination, make it look good when I'm on the pads, make the sounds that are really loud like I'm really good at it so that I can like look like I really did it well, and then like I'm happy if I can do that in the ring. There's in traditional Thai training pedagogy, there's way more flexibility for giving someone a technique or giving someone something that they're supposed to be doing, and then allowing their natural version of that to become stronger as it carries out. So instead of like memorizing phrases in a language that you can ask where the bathroom is really casually or something, you actually it's more of an immersion. The way that I think the Thai pedagogy traditionally has been set up is way less memorizing combinations and learning straight from the teacher that this is the way you're supposed to do something, and instead it's immersive in the sense of like you need to start solving these problems for yourself, thinking for yourself, like moving in an overall like conversation kind of experience rather than like learn and repeat.
Right.
And I think that you can see that a lot in the playfulness between, you'll see a little bit of playfulness between padman and student if they've been around each other for a really long time, but you really see it in sparring. And Chachai Sasakun, who is WBC champion, but he also was an incredible Muay Thai fighter prior to going into Western boxing. He talks about how important sparring was for his generation, which is the golden age of Muay Thai. And he said we didn't even have shin guards, so you had to have total control. Like you had to be able to feel everything to be able to play like that. And he said that the greatest fighters were the fighters who spent all their time sparring. That's really how you learn the feeling for everything.
If you want to get a sense of what she's talking about, look up Sayanchai and Singdam sparring. Looks like they're having a ton of fun. There's a couple ones where Singdom's doing pad work and then Sayanchai like sneaks up and kicks his leg out from under him.
Yeah.
So
definitely
you have
see that playfulness there,
Yeah.
even in Sansai's fights because of the kinds of fights he's allowed to fight in now. So you see that playfulness come out really easily.
Yeah, for the last couple of years he's just been dunking on Westerners, just having a lot of fun in there. It's awesome to watch. So you have a very aggressive style, and it's interesting because a lot of Westerners are kind of pigeonholed into that, like the stereotype is that they don't know how to score in Muay Thai. They come forward, throw a lot of hands, but you're aggressive in a really Thai way. So how did you kind of develop that Muay Khao style? Is it something that seemed intuitive and came naturally at the beginning, or was it like your trainers were like, okay, you're gonna be this?
No, actually, my trainers always wanted me to be femur because I'm small. So being a small fighter and being like very evasive and kind of tricky is what my body type, and maybe being a woman is what my trainers really wanted me to do, and I was not that. I think it was very frustrating for them, and I honestly tried to be molded in the things that they thought that I should do, but it just never felt right. I just wasn't good at it. Like it felt like I was always trying to do something instead of that I was actually fighting. And then I had a natural inclination, I think, towards knees in the clinch way before I was any good at it. And it was probably a good year into being in Thailand full time, fighting all the time. I was fighting like every 11 days or something. That I even realized that there are styles of Muay Thai. Like I just thought there was Muay Thai.
Right.
And so when I started to recognize and see and learn about different styles, and I actually started to understand Muay Khao and that my tendencies were a thing instead of an accident, I wouldn't say that I picked it. It's not like you have the characters rotating in a video game and you're like, I want the one with the axe. Like it's you have tendencies and then you can kind of lean towards them. And I think that's what happened with me, is that being able to see fighters who had that style allowed me to kind of increase my vocabulary and my influences. And as I got better at it, then my trainers became more like, oh shit, yeah, those knees are pretty good. Let's go in that direction instead of trying to make you so evasive. But I think that it's an endless work in progress. Like I don't feel that I'm like now established Muay Thai. I know everything in Muay Thai. Like there's so many styles even within one given style.
Right.
And one of the more beautiful things about Muay Thai is that you can never ever reach the end of it. Like there's just such depth to every aspect of it. I do think that I'm still a little bit like aggressive Westerner, but not in a like I don't understand what's going on. I'm just barreling forward. I do understand scoring, so in a long process of trial and error, I have learned how my style scores or doesn't score, and how the opposites of my style score or don't score against me. One of the more amazing things about fighting in Thailand and why it's so difficult is that there are just so many ways to lose. Like ways that you didn't know you could lose because you thought it was like adding on a calculator how many times you hit someone, and it's not like that. It's performance. So that's been a long process of learning to understand that, and there have been some losses that you're like, that sucks, but I'm not right. Like it's not like,
at least I don't know what's going on now.
You're like, no, I see how that happened. Yeah.
So who would you say have been your biggest influence as a fighter? You've gotten the chance to train with tons of legends, and I know that you've gravitated towards some more than others. Like I think Diesel Noy and Karahat you've done a lot of work with. So who would you say has had the biggest influence on your style?
Oh, that would be hard to say. It's funny that I love Karahat and Diesel Noy so much because they are nothing like each other.
Complete opposites, yeah.
You can't be both. But I'm somehow Frankensteined into both. I think that what I like about both of them is kind of an ethic. Like Karahat is not Muay Thai. He's not a knee fighter. Although he was when he was young. He said that when he got to Bangkok, he was too lazy to be a Muay Thai fighter. He didn't like to train that hard, so he became like the best femur fighter ever. I think that what I like about his style, even though he's not Muay Thai, is that his heart is Muay Thai. Like he really stays in the fight all the time, as opposed to someone like Silipatai or Samart, who are just incredibly good at like slipping out of the way all the time. So I think that the like heart of Diesel Noy, and he came to my gym for 6 months. He was coming 3 days a week. We brought him down as part of this Legends and Residents project to try to bring together legends from the golden age to like contemporary active Muay Thai, which is why we brought him to my gym. And so I listened to him a lot. Like I was listening to him talking as kind of like a I hate to use such a cliche example, but like a Mr. Miyagi. Like he was just totally spitting knowledge all the time. But like the way he talked in a term of like, this is the ethic you should have as a fighter, that's so far beyond like make sure you bounce your knee to like do this, whatever. I think that I've been imprinted by Diesel Noy in a really strong way because of how much I listen to him. So I'd probably put him at number one for who's influenced me the most. But I'm super enamored of Karahat's style, and weirdly with my trainers trying to make me femur for so long, and I just hated it. He's such a femur fighter, and sometimes when he shows me things, I'm like, God, that feels good. Like I like that part of it, and it works. So I think those two are the strongest for me.
That's awesome. You mentioned like trying to put golden age fighters with modern fighters. Is that something that doesn't happen a lot? Like I don't know how much crossover there's been, how much training modern fighters are doing with golden age legends, whether they're like actively coaching.
There's not a lot, unfortunately. Some of the golden age legends have gyms. Like Samart has his own gym, although I think he's more active in it now than he was a couple of years ago. Someone like Lamnamoon has had a gym for a very long time, and he's very involved in his fighters. And Somrak, like when he had recently retired, he was bringing people up, so like he's responsible for many fighters out of jockey gyms, so he had direct influence with a young Sanchai and Silipatai and Lord Silla, people like that.
Yeah.
So there is examples of legends of the Golden Age who kind of like had influence in gyms, bringing people up, but largely they're kind of like Ronin, like samurais that are just kind of off with nothing, and they don't have a lot of financial stability, and they'll kind of hop between gyms. And then also the way that gyms in Thailand function. In the West, we like really love our padman and give them a lot of respect, and here a padman is just kind of like grunt work, like it's not super respected work. So it has a lot of different levels and elements involved in it, where you can have like someone who you think is like one of the greatest fighters you've ever met is a padman in a gym, and he's like really low on the ladder in terms of like how he's treated at the gym. So the way that I think my project in Preserve the Legacy and my patron, the way that's influenced people in the West, people have started to see these fighters, these ex-fighters, not only in their fights are becoming more visible because now they know other names other than Bukau and Sanchai who to look for, but they're also seeing them as trainers now, and so they'll actually come to Thailand and seek them out, like for private lessons and things like this. Yodkun Pon is a very good example of that. He is like, people in Thailand don't know where Yodkun Pon is, and he's like right next door to my gym. He's a referee at a bar down the road where kids get experience in Pattaya, so he like referees kids and show fights and things. But then he'll take private lessons in the gym, and he's an extraordinary teacher. He's so smart, and his style is so incredible, and people are now coming to Thailand looking for him, and he laughs and tells me all the time, he's like, I always know people came from you because they're like, you're the elbow hunter. Like, nobody calls me the elbow hunter, but they're like, oh my god, you're the elbow hunter. Like, yeah, they should know who you are. Incredible. Yeah.
That's amazing. There's always this problem in fighting with like what they do after fighting, and there's always somebody at the top making money off the fighters, and there's a lot of exploitation, and that seems even more pronounced in Muay Thai than a lot of other combat sports, which is a shame. But it's amazing that you're bringing attention to them. Hearing about Yod Kupon getting private lessons in and people recognizing him from your videos is amazing. I want to come back to something you were saying earlier about there being so many ways to lose in Muay Thai. It's really interesting that Muay Thai is maybe the only combat sport I can think of with a very clear and deliberate aesthetic preference. You get these in stuff like MMA, but it seems like not deliberate at all, where it's just a function of judges not really knowing what they're doing, so they reward aggression. But Muay Thai has like a very deliberate aesthetic of what they want from fighters, favoring balance and control, and it's seen through like maintaining composure on the outside. And you talked about how moving backwards is kind of the sign that you're winning in Muay Thai, that you have control of the fight and you're like, okay, come on, get me. It's your turn to score a point. And it seems like fighters who rely on pressure and pushing a pace are almost accepting an aesthetic disadvantage in order to implement their game. From talking to Kevin, it seems like certain styles are kind of looked down upon and marginalized in Thailand for not fitting this ideal aesthetic. Could you talk a little bit about that? And also, as an aggressive Muay Cow, how you see that? Do you feel like going into your fights, you're kind of accepting a scoring disadvantage in order to implement your game? How do you feel about that kind of aesthetic preference?
It's changing already, which is, you see a lot more of these 3-round shows that are for international audiences. So it's like Max Muay Thai and MX and Thai Fight. A lot of these fights are kind of taking out the narrative structure that Muay Thai scoring traditionally has, and that makes Muay Thai so interesting. Is this 5-round narrative structure? As a Muay Thai fighter and as an aggressive fighter, when I go into a fight, because I understand the narrative structure of it, I understand that even as the aggressive fighter, I basically have to write checks early that I'm going to cash in later. And if I'm not able to do that, all that good work I put in the beginning actually works against me if I'm not able to kind of cash in at the end. So you have to think about the entire fight. Like, you have to think about your progression all the way through. I think this is something that's very hard for Westerners because we just think of it as round by round and that it's like whoever hits the most or something.
Yeah.
And so if you have two really strong rounds, you're like, well, those two are in the bank. And so if I start to fade later in the fight, I've already made good on those early rounds, and that's not the way it works in Thailand mostly. I think that one of the more beautiful things about how the aesthetic of Muay Thai in showing composure and showing balance, once you get an eye for it, like once you've tasted it as a viewer, it becomes really hard. It changes your eyes in being able to watch other kinds of fighting. Mm-hmm. So I used to actually watch a lot of MMA. On Kevin and my honeymoon, we were watching the WEC, then we were watching a lot of UFC, and because some of our favorite fighters got brought over there and things like this. And I can't watch MMA anymore because they're like 10 feet away from each other all the time. It's like the most social distancing sport ever. And they're always hitting and then running away from each other. There's no balance. Like, they're off balance before the shot, after the shot. Maybe it lands, maybe it doesn't. Like, I think because I personally put the same aesthetic that I've become accustomed to and I'm looking for from Muay Thai onto other sports, I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Like, I can't see it the same way. But when you look for those little details and you start talking about who's the greatest fighter ever, or like, why is this fight so interesting or something, and you see those little elements, when you see a fighter who is tall and long and kind of evasive like Samart is so good at just like, all the legends talk about how he had such good eyes. What they mean by that is that his timing was really good. He could see everything. He saw when he had an opening. He saw when a shot was coming at him. And so he kind of looks all the time as though he's floating above the action. Like, he's just outside of it and kind of like working around it. And you put him against a powerful fighter, and he just looks completely like someone is stumbling after him.
Yeah.
But then you can take like a super powerful fighter and put them against another fighter like that, and it looks like just walking through everything. It's like when you see King Kong with like bullets flying off of him or something, you're like, how is he doing that? Is that within the aesthetic of Muay Thai and within those styles, and because you're looking at things like balance, like being unaffected, like strategy and being able to see things and time things, it looks like it looks like a magic trick or something. It looks like you're actually looking at Marvel characters with superpowers that are like using their superpowers against each other. And I think that because of that aesthetic and because of the way that people used to train and be able to carry out that aesthetic so well in the Golden Age, you really had kind of larger than life fighters who had unique personalities. In Thai you call it sine. It means like charm, being like charismatic. Their particular personality really came out in their fights in a way that I don't see in contemporary Muay Thai. And I follow the same fighters. Like, I know how Sang Mani, who's an amazing fighter, I know how he fights. Like, he's going to fight like this against anybody, but it doesn't have the same, like, that's Superman. Like, Superman's going to do Superman things.
I can see what you're saying there.
Somebody.
Like, watching Samar fight, it looks like he's moving so much, but there's just a beautiful economy of movement and balance that's just almost unrivaled in anything I've seen. Like, you watch him and
other so much, and he looks like he's at a bus stop. Like, like, oh, is it raining? Like, I don't.
Guys like Samrak, I can definitely see what you're saying about just having very visible personalities in their fights that don't really come out anymore. Yeah. You were talking about like the flow of the fight and how it's not like you're banking early rounds with the expectation that those are going to matter a lot in scoring. Mm-hmm. In modern Muay Thai, it seems like the fighters will do a lot less in the first two rounds. Like, it's almost become accepted that not that so much that those are like feeler rounds to kind of get started and like figure out your reads and everything, but almost like rounds to waste because they know they're not going to do anything there. Whereas in the Golden Age, it seemed like they got started a lot earlier. They wouldn't fight all out from the first round, but you watch like guys like Virapal, Samson Isan, even the less pressure oriented guys, they're still like actually fighting in the first couple of rounds. So I've heard that a lot of that has to do with gambling, but I haven't really been clear exactly on how gambling influences the sport. So why is that? Has there been what developments have kind of changed that and made the first couple of rounds kind of throwaways more so than they used to be?
I probably couldn't tell you with like 100% authority how that worked. It's also hard to know what the first two rounds really looked like because most of what we
They're
have from the
stitched together.
are these one song chai fights, which they put 1 and 2 together. So
Yeah.
it's like highlights of 1 and 2. So I'm not sure what those looked like most of the time during the Golden Age or in like less than champion versus champion fights. There's definitely a slow start now. And that's because the first 2 rounds aren't really scored. So the first 2 rounds are generally 10-10 unless something super spectacular happens in them or if you kind of have to reference them later. So fighters are not going to go all out during those rounds. 1, because they're saving themselves for the scoring rounds. But 2, because gambling is such an important part of Muay Thai, it actually kind of drives me crazy when people parrot something that they heard from either Sanchai or Samart that gambling has ruined Muay Thai. There is no Muay Thai without gambling. It doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't exist. It's like water ruined the ocean. It makes no sense. But the effect of gambling in that sense is that they're saving themselves for the scoring rounds because they're really going to have to go harder. So they don't want to tire themselves out, but they also don't necessarily want to show all of their cards. So you'll see fighters kind of sandbag in rounds 1 and 2, and so it looks like they're just like not even doing anything, but they actually might be sandbagging and looking like I'm not a really powerful fighter, or I don't have a lot of gears, or I don't have a lot of weapons, that then they're going to bring out in the scoring rounds and either surprise their opponent, which would be great, or they can also change the odds of the fight when people have bought in for cheap.
Right.
So people bought in starting at round 3, and then you were really cheap because you looked like you have no idea what you're doing, and then all of a sudden you're incredible in round 4. Your people who kind of knew what to look for can make a lot of money on the odds in that way. So the gameplay element of how Muay Thai is performed comes from gambling, and that's why you might see a little bit of that. And then in the Golden Age, there wasn't as much of this like dancing off in round 5. You see a lot of that now. And the reason you see that now, you'll hear in English a lot of people explain that it's that people fight so much that they don't want to like damage themselves unnecessarily because they have other fights coming up. That's true if you're looking at a fight that like isn't super important kind of thing. Like if it's a championship fight, you're not going to see something like that.
Right.
But it's also that if you have a huge lead, money has already been exchanged. They're already eating peanuts in the stands. So like, no, you don't have to like keep going crazy unless it's going to be like, for your honor or for a rematch or something like that. So there's a lot more going on outside of the actual fight. Like my favorite stadium is Raja Damnern. If you go watch a fight at Raja Damnern and you're sitting ringside, between rounds, you'll hear the din of the gamblers. Between rounds, they're screaming and like pounding on the boards to get the attention of the people in the ring. They'll have like a gold chain that they'll show, but everyone knows that size gold chain is like 10,000 baht, 20,000 baht, and so they're basically giving an injection to that fighter, and they're showing the chain, being like, this is how much I'll give you if you turn it up in the round or whatever. The thing is, the fighters are looking at the gamblers, the corners are looking at the gamblers, the referees are looking at the gamblers. Like everyone wants to know, how is this story being read, and it's happening out like this, which I think a lot of Westerners, when we go watch a fight, we're like, this is happening between 2 people and there's maybe a third guy in there. Like there's so many people involved in the Muay Thai fight. It really is the entire arena during each fight, which I find absolutely amazing. I think it's one of the coolest things about Muay Thai.
Yeah, there's so much involvement in the crowd that you don't see in a lot of other arts.
Man, they get so into it. Like,
yeah.
How can you not be excited when like everyone is?
Every time someone throws a knee, even if they're like not really landing it, they're shouting. It's amazing.
Totally. Yeah.
Is gambling something you keep in mind in your fights?
I don't fight in the kinds of stadia that have really big gambling involved in them. Um, I I don't really think about it because one, I don't understand it, so like I can't do a whole lot. When I first started, my first 2 years when I was up in Chiang Mai, I had he wasn't my trainer, but he was a trainer at the gym. His name is Nook. He's one of the coolest like characters of my Muay Thai career. He's so crazy. But he would get really excited. He's a hardcore gambler, even though he gambles very little amounts of money. But he's like at the horse races every Saturday kind of thing. But when I was getting ready to go fight, he would let me know that he was going to bet on me, and it made me so nervous. Like I underperformed all the time,
like,
knowing
great.
that
Thanks for
people
the pressure.
I cared about, totally knowing that people I cared about were putting money on me. Now I'm like, that's a good bet. Like now I'm totally into it. But I don't think about gambling in terms of like my own performance or what I'm going to do. One, because I don't gamble, and two, because I don't understand it. But gamblers like me because I'm small and I can beat people who are bigger. So they can take really long odds on me and make money. So they were like, I like this horse. And so I kind of, I gained in popularity among gamblers because of the way that I fight. Now people know who I am, so people won't bet against me. So I don't think gamblers love me that much anymore. But for a while there, I was very loved for my ability to kind of beat the odds, I think.
That's awesome. Have you ever gotten offered like incentives, like turn it up this round and I'll kick you over some money?
I don't remember ever being told directly that I had an injection during a fight. My cornermen, I think, a few times have like really insisted that I do something that I'm not really known for. Like they're like, punch a lot, and I'm like, I'm not a puncher, but that's probably to do with like what a bet is. I've been told knockout in this round. I think it's probably for gambling.
So we both talked a lot about the difference between the Golden Age and modern Muay Thai, about how the Golden Age had a lot more diversity of technique. The fighters seemed more well-rounded, and particularly I think the clinch has changed a lot. Like in the Golden Age, it's focused a lot more around transitions and being open. If you look at what they're doing in the clinch, they will constantly be moving, constantly transitioning to other things, and doing damage, whereas the modern game seems a lot more focused around locking. I've heard a lot of fighters like Cyan Chai and I think Samart say that there's too much clinching in Muay Thai, and I'm not entirely sure if I buy that, because a lot of the guys you hear that from are FAMUs, of course, who probably never like clinching much anyway. And some of it seems to be to deal with like how quickly they break up the clinch now. I've heard you complain about that before, and especially in Bangkok stadiums, Rajadamnern and Lumpini, it seems like a lot of the stalling is because of that, where they're getting in the clinch and the ref is going to break it up very soon so they can feel free to grab on and hold and stall. I'd like to get your thoughts on that, about how clinching has changed and why that is.
I think, again, I can't be fully authoritative on this. It's just my views on how I've seen changes, and then from what the legends who I've talked to who are clinchers have talked about. So the things that I've heard as huge and very persistent complaints from Golden Age fighters about what's different about Muay Thai now is that gamblers really like power. So they believe the fighter, and I'm translating from Thai. They say believe. It means they like will put money on this person. So when I say they believe this fighter, I mean they're putting money on the fighter who is demonstrating a lot of power. So gamblers love power. They love the like super hard throw to the ground. If you look at the Golden Age, there was Nam Kabuan is a good example of this. Nam Kabuan had amazing body locks. So he would lock the body and he would actually do like small lifts and throws. Olay was actually really good at this as well.
Wang Chinoy is another guy that stands out.
Oh, and he was small too.
Yeah.
Ripping people. Yeah, so there was that in the Golden Age, but it wasn't as much a like, let me do 10 power moves. It was like 2 power moves within a fight, and they were like kind of incredible.
Yeah.
Nowadays, if you try to do a power move and fail, like if you try to knock your opponent over or throw them to the ground and you fail, and you kind of break your posture, you're punished for it by the score, and you're punished for it by the gamblers, whereas before it was like that didn't work in the Golden Age, and it wasn't that big a deal. So nowadays, with gamblers liking power so much, that's why you see a lot of locking, that's why you see a lot of tripping, that's why you see a lot of kind of short exchange clinching, that back in the Golden Age, when referees would let the clinch go, when you see two clinch fighters, if you watch Samson Hassan versus Pepsi, they fought 3 times. It's like watching snakes when they're just like going around each other, except not ridiculous. Like it's like they couldn't lock each other if they tried, because they're just so adept. Like both of them are so good. If you watch Long Swan versus Chumuk Pet, both of them are very, very strong clinchers.
His fight with Lam Moon too.
Oh my god. And then Sang Tianoi was enormous versus Chumuk Pet when the two of them fought. There was so much weight between them. And Sang Tianoi, normally, he's a very tall fighter. He's able to do these really long moves. He could not get Chumuk Pet off of him. He was doing these incredible turns, and Chumuk Pet was just like a squirrel caught to his chest, like kind of flipping around with him and then doing these other things. So you see much less of that now. One, because the referee doesn't let the clinch develop the way that they used to. And 2, people aren't as good of clinchers as they used to be. So they actually do just lock and hang in there. I recently posted on my techniques page a beautiful fight, actually, between Pet Boon Chu and Yodwicha from, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or something. And they were both top clinch fighters of their time. And if you look at that compared to one of the like Golden Age clinch fights, it's like people singing Mary Had a Little Lamb and then like a Led Zeppelin song.
Yeah.
These are not the same thing, but it's cool that like they're still, you know, it's its own thing. It's just not the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think that because judging has changed, like what's rewarded has changed both in striking and in clinching. They've outlawed some things that you used to be able to do, like plowing you can't do anymore, and they've made things legal now that you didn't used to be able to do. There are trips that you're allowed to do now that you weren't allowed to do in the Golden Age, and Nam Kabuan has outright said, if you were allowed to trip me back in the day like that, I wouldn't have been able to clinch anybody.
What kind of trips are those? I've never really been clear on exactly what's legal for like tripping and clinching in Muay Thai. Oh, okay.
You didn't used to be able to do ankle sweeps in the clinch, and Nam Kabuan said that when you come up to knee from that range, if people could kick your ankle out, he would never be able to knee.
Yeah.
So if you're afraid of being tripped, you're not going to knee. You become really stagnant, and so you just lock. Things get shaped by the way things are scored, and then also there's just the natural diluting of techniques. So my trainer at my gym, Petrun Rung, he has active fighters that he's brought up since kids. They're fighters at Lumpini and Rajadamnern. He has to train them for how things are scored now. He can't be like, well, back in my day, you could lock the body and do blah, 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 because you're not scoring back in the day. You're scoring now. So he doesn't want his fighters to lose fights for, moral reasons, because, damn it, I'm going to do these amazing techniques. Like, you want your fighters to have the best shot, to have winning careers and not lose money for gamblers who say horrible things to you and shout at you when you're leaving the ring if you've done something stupid. So, if things change, people are going to change with it. It's just kind of a natural thing for a living art.
Yeah, it definitely seems like there's a much lower level of clinching talent. Like in the Golden Age, everyone is so well-rounded. Even the guys who try to avoid clinching are so good there.
We're awesome at clinch.
Yeah.
Right?
Like watching Gensak fight Lamnamoon.
Yeah,
just
totally.
Like being super competitive with there and counter clinching consistently the whole fight. And now guys like Sai Chai, the outside fighters, the guys who, unless you're a dedicated Muay Cow, it seems like they don't really make much of the clinch, and they're more focused on trying to avoid it entirely.
Yeah, I think that there's a hidden element to Sanchai because he's so visible in the West. Everyone knows Sanchai. Everyone loves Sanchai. Most people misunderstand Sanchai. But if you look at when he was a stadium fighter, like 10 years ago, when he was actually an incredible, competitive contender in the stadia of Bangkok, he was fighting up like he still fights people bigger than him, but he fights people who have like 20 fights. Like,
Yeah.
what fucking risk is there in what he's doing? But when he was fighting, like Pep Chu, or he was fighting Tanon Chai or Yodwicha, he was giving up significant weight to these people.
Right.
And even though he's incredibly skilled, when someone comes to grab you and they have weight on you, they're gonna snuff you, like they're gonna control you. So his ability to do what he wanted to do was absolutely shaped by fighting people bigger than him. In the Golden Age, you had someone like Chmook Pet, who fought people bigger than him all the time and made it look like he was just controlling them. It was crazy. But that's like he's a superhuman. Like
he's like one of the greatest. Well, Saenchai is too, but.
Yeah, so you can see how he got frustrated. You can see how Saenchai was like, I can't fight the way I want to fight, because in order to get people to gamble, they had to keep giving him, bigger and bigger people, and that's going to shape what he's able to do in his fights. Like,
right.
I get frustrated by that. My opponents outweigh me by 25 pounds. There are things I cannot do that I want to do. It's like, not every fight.
Yeah, it's another interesting thing about Muay Thai. Like, when it seems like if someone has too much success in their own weight class, they'll like push them up. So, with your own fights, did you kind of exhaust the options at your own weight, or are there not a lot of like competition around your own weight? Why are you so consistently fighting up?
I'm a difficult weight to begin with because I walk around at like 100 pounds. So those are not a lot of fighters at that weight who stay at that weight. They get bigger, and I don't. So, I would have an opponent who, in a matter of 3 years in which I was fighting her, she would put on 10 kilos because she's just growing still, and I'm not. But it also became that people my size don't want to fight me. They're like, that's not a fair match. And I honestly have to be like, that's actually fair. Like,
fair enough.
I should not be fighting someone my size because I'd been fighting big for a while. When I was in Chiang Mai, my opponents were a little bit bigger, and they were getting slightly bigger all the time. And then occasionally I'd have like a jump where they were like, a solid 13 kilos bigger than me or something.
Oh my God.
And I wasn't ready for it. So I was like, this is ridiculous. I can't do this. But then over the years, I did it more and more. And now I'm like, that's kind of normal for me. But I had been fighting bigger for quite a long time. And then they gave me someone my actual size who was a Northern champion. So it was presented as the, like, if she beats Sylvie, good for her. Like, this will be really good for her career. If she doesn't, nobody's going to falter for it because Sylvie's very hard to fight. So it was kind of a, like, not a lot of skin to be lost for her.
Yeah. When
I was fighting, she's quite a bit taller than me. When I was fighting her, I went to throw her the way that I try to throw most of my opponents in the clinch. And it was like that scene when Spider-Man's just become Spider-Man and he, like, rips the door off. She was my size, and she just went like, whoop, and just, like, flew on the ground. And I was like, holy shit, like, I don't think I should be fighting this size anymore. Like, this is not, I can't do this. So in Thailand, there's a interest in making fights interesting to watch rather than, like, everything on paper matches. I think that there's less of that in Western matchups. Like, they want the paperwork to look the same. Like,
it's more about protecting, like, the athlete's career. They have managers the managers aren't like, we want to get you in there with bigger people. They're like, we want to avoid losses and we want the best for your career development. And the way that's seen in the West is that especially with the higher level athletes, they're usually very carefully controlled. Like, a lot of boxers will avoid bad matchups, and Muay Thai seems like the complete opposite of that.
I don't think it's entirely different from that. I think that there's still a lot of, because handlers or promoters or whomever, they want to keep their stars as stars, and so
right.
they want to make the kind of people can be protected or kind of not given,
especially in the modern game,
like,
more.
Yeah, people are still built. They still build people in order to have these names, but for gambling and for Thai audiences, they really, really like to see matchups that seem like this could really go in an interesting direction. And so you'll see more visually unusual matchups than I think you would see in the West.
Right, that makes sense. Regarding clinching, I've heard you talk about how they let it go on for longer in other areas, whereas in Bangkok they tend to break it up really quickly. Have you found that clinching in the other areas where they let it go on, does it kind of resemble the Golden Age a little bit more, or is it still the heavy focus on locking that you see in the modern era?
The locking has to do with the skills of the fighters, whereas the breaking up of it has to do with the referees. So those are different things that kind of sometimes can be a perfect storm together. If you go into the provinces, like if you go into Asan, they let the clinch go. Like it's beautiful. It's kind of like Golden Age. They just let it go and let it develop. That doesn't necessarily mean that the fighters are good
Yeah.
in the clinch, but they do let it go, and so they learn to work in it, which is really nice. It depends on the show in Bangkok. Like Raja Damnar and Lumpini will let the clinch go more than like these Muay hardcore and like Super Champ. Those get broken really fast. Max Muay Thai, they break it after like 2 seconds all the time because they want the like swimming windmill thing.
Max Muay Thai seems like more of a Western bastardization.
It is. I don't even know if I should say this. It's called entertainment. Like it's actually sanctioned by a para part of the Muay Thai authority. It's not like traditional Muay Thai.
Right.
But Westerners love it, and I live in Pattaya, so there will be people who come to Pattaya and they're like, "My goal is to come and fight at Max Muay Thai." And I'm like, really? That's odd.
Interesting.
It's very weird. But I think that what they're trying to do with breaking the clinch now is they do want to drive the action. Like they don't want it to just stagnate and die, and that's partially the fault of fighters. That's partially the way that fighters train. If you look at the way they trained in the Golden Age, the way that they clinched, I've learned a way watered down version of what they did, and my version's still pretty hardcore for right now, which is like you clinch for an hour and you don't get to stop. If you train like that, you get fighters who just can keep moving. If you don't train like that, you get fighters who are trying to like lock in order to get broken or to kind of stagnate, or they're just like holding on to each other to like get the round to end or something. So you can't entirely blame scoring, and you can't entirely blame referees, and you can't entirely blame fighters. It's the everything has changed in tandem, and it's just moving in this direction towards less and less good clinching. I will say on a personal note that in the same way that like they'll just find bigger and bigger and bigger opponents for me, the way that Chmuk Pet was fighting bigger people just all the time in order to like, Sanchai was fighting bigger people in order to just try to find interesting, fun matches for people. There is also a thing where if a fighter is really known for something, like Nam Kabuan is very famous for plowing, which you're not allowed to do anymore. He was just unreal, like incredible at the plow. When he would do it against people who were so much smaller than him, he plowed Hippie and Karahat, who are like my size.
Hippie's tiny.
Like out of the ring kind of thing. And so they changed the rules. They're like, you can't do that anymore. They have not officially changed the rules of clinching, but the more I'm known, like the more recognized I become, the more people they're like, oh, Sylvie's fighting, we kind of know what we're expecting from her. They will break my clinch more and more and more.
Okay.
As a handicap, like as a way to kind of give my opponent more of a chance or more of a fight to protect her, this kind of thing. And that's, I don't want to be like, it's so unfair, they're against me, blah, blah, blah. Like, they're trying to make competitive fights. They're trying to make good fights. In order for me to be able to keep fighting, I actually have to lose. Like, if I won all the time, nobody would fight me. So as much as it sucks to lose, and sometimes when I lose, I'm like, that was total shit, it means I'll fight again. Whereas if you have someone like Diesel Noi, who literally nobody can beat, he was stripped of his belt and retired. Like, that sucks. I don't want that either. So, it's I'm sure that there are ways of kind of individual shaping that take place fight to fight that isn't even necessarily like the way Muay Thai is going. It's not a monolith.
Right. Getting into some more technical questions. One thing that Thais have obviously known forever, and I think other arts are kind of starting to discover, is the importance of like how you train and drill your entries into the clinch. One fight that comes to mind for me is Valentina Shevchenko's fight with Ioana Jędrzejczyk in the UFC. If you look at the long extended clinch exchanges, they're pretty competitive. Ioana is holding her own. She's doing damage, and Valentina can't easily take her down or get to her positions. But so often Valentina would like duck under a right hand and then come up with a head and arm and then just toss her near a couple times before Ioana could do anything. And she kind of controlled the fight just by perfecting her entries into the clinch and immediately getting to the position she wanted. So I was wondering, as someone who works a lot in the clinch to overwhelm opponents, what are your kind of favorite tactics and strategies for getting into the clinch?
My opponents are so much bigger than me that I often am dealing with getting past their length. Like I'm really just trying to get to my range. So my entry is actually far less high vocabulary finessed as I want it to be, and it's something that I'm still consistently working on. And Long Sawan, who is one of these like pit bull fighters from the golden age, I asked Karahat and Gansak separately who was the hardest person to fight, and they didn't even let me finish saying the words. They were like, Long Sawan, like he was
Wow.
just a nightmare because he's exhausting. He told me, Long Sawan told me, because he was in my corner, he's like, you have to jab first. Like, you look like an asshole running in like that. Like, you went in all the time. So I think that the closing of distance as a progressive thing, instead of like biting your mouth guard and leaping across space to grab someone, is the part of my clinch entry that I've struggled the most with, because it's getting past those weapons at the range that's not my range. But teeps and jabs, honestly, are like awesome clinch entries. I think that I tend to use like a left hook on my way in, but I don't think I do that on purpose. I think that it's just like something that happens. But over my career, it's changed quite a bit in terms of like how I tend to be coming into the clinch and which knee I'm kind of like landing with when I get there and stuff like that. But I think that in terms of what you're talking about two fighters who are kind of holding their own against each other in the clinch, or kind of like every time you get to one place, the person immediately counters it and kind of like creates an endless Rubik's Cube, kind of like keep solving this, keep solving this, keep solving this. That's high level clinch, even if it's 3 seconds, 4 seconds at a time, is that you're always countering what someone is doing. And I think that for me, speeding up my stack of like how quickly I can get into the framed position where I can do the most damage is just putting that on the end of how to get across that distance.
Right. And now in terms of your strategy and approach to the clinch in general, some fighters seem to favor like a hit and run style clinching, like Wong Chinoy will come in, land a couple knees and then get out, whereas others want to like stay in there and drown their opponents. And you seem much more of the second type. So what is your general goal and strategy once you get into the clinch, and like what positions do you favor there?
I call it a frame. I say it's building a frame, but it's basically one hand behind the neck and one hand controlling the other arm, like kind of hopefully from the inside, because you can control elbows better that way. That's my ideal position because you can switch it and you can move and score from that position. A lot of people in the West are only taught this like double plum lock, the like double inside. That's an incredibly dominant position, but if the person you're clinching knows fuck all about clinch, you're not getting there. Like, you don't see that position in Lumpini and Rajat ever.
Yeah.
You'll see Diesel Noy get it a couple of times, and you're just like, I'm surprised that person's alive after this fight that he got that. Samart was amazing in the Diesel Noy versus Samart fight at slipping out of it. He was just kind of popping out of it for the first couple of rounds. I think that for me, staying in is really important in that, again, the level of Muay Thai that I'm at, and because of the kind of matchups that I have, more or less, a lot of what Muay Thai is in Thailand is a battle over distance and whose distance you're fighting at. I do not want to be at my opponent's striking distance. I don't want to be at pad range because they're much better at timing. They're much longer. Like, they can hit me when I can't hit them. So for me, staying in is like not having to go through that, like, Indiana Jones, arrows firing at me on my way in. I don't want to go through that twice. So I try to stay on the inside. And you actually used what I like to say. You said it's like drowning somebody. I feel like when I get inside with my opponents, I can pull them into the deep end, and I'm comfortable in the deep end. I spend a lot of time there, and they're not. So I can feel them kind of not breathing as much anymore. A couple of my knees, I start hearing the little sound that I'm like, oh, that's that sound I'm looking for. So without locking on like a pit bull and just like praying that I can stay in that position, I do try to stay at the same range and then just kind of like slip around into, from this dominant position to a less one to a better one, and kind of move around in that sense. It's much easier for a ref to come save my opponent or break a clinch if you get really still. If you remain active, they look like a jerk breaking you up. And so even if they might do it. They might just break me anyway, like while I'm totally landing knees on my opponent, but it makes them look bad. So I try to do that.
Right.
try to make it look bad.
So in terms of your style, obviously you're heavily centered around the clinch, so lots of pressure. Do you feel like you get started a little bit earlier than most fighters? I feel like watching a couple of your fights, it seems like they're not really expecting you to do too much in the first round, and you kind of come out a little bit stronger than you usually see in Muay Thai. So is that like a deliberate thing to push the pace and do attritional damage?
Again, it's that kind of like cashing a check thing. So like I wanna basically show what I'm gonna be doing early, so that if my opponent is countering something that I do, I can solve their solve. Like if they start snuffing my clinch because I started clinching in round 4, I have 1 round to resolve what they've done. Whereas if I start clinching earlier and they solve it, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna make you really fucking tired, and then you're not gonna be able to solve that anymore. So as the kind of fighter that I am, I do better in the long haul. Like, I want a 5-round fight. I don't want a 3-round fight. If I let my opponent kind of like play around and rest for the first 2 rounds, they're much less tired on the end of it. And because I'm the smaller fighter, even if I'm affecting them, just by them being bigger, when they hit me, the audience believes that hurt because I'm small. Mm-hmm. So even if it didn't, it's like their strikes count for more than mine just based on our visual. So the more tired I can make them, the more I can break their composure, and make them look like they're trying to get away from me instead of that they are staying away from me, which is a very subtle change, but you'll see it in fights. It looks like someone's running from you versus it looks like someone is dancing away from you. That's one of the reasons that I need to start sooner in fights, and I have, again, it's trial and error. I've had many fights where I'm trying to do the like soft opener, and I don't do well in those fights. I don't win the fights where I'm like patty caking around for the first 2 rounds to try to look like I'm not what I am. It's better to like show what I am early and then just get better at it as I go.
You've been working on what you call a diamond guard, which kind of looks like a boxing cross-arm guard. How has that been going? How has that progressed? The arm position seems like it'd really be good for getting inside position in the clinch when you're walking people down.
Yeah, it's cool because one, people just don't know what it is. It's got this kind of first effect where when I do it, there's kind of a like, what the hell was that from the person in front of me, where they're like, they don't even know what to do with it yet. It's maybe like how a frilled lizard, when it puts its like frills out, you're like, I didn't know it did that. And so once you get over the shock of it, you can start dealing with it a little bit. But I haven't been able to use it so much in fights yet because everything's been shut down now for 2 months, and I've only been working on it for a little bit before everything shut down. So I kind of have a time now to work on it before unveiling it, really, like in a fight or something like that. What I like about it is that it allows me to protect myself with flexibility. So because I'm small and because of the way I fight, and because people know who I am, in the way that Yod Kun Pan is known as the elbow hunter and everyone looks out for his elbows, I'm known the way Nampan was as Mr. Rotten Face, in that, like, the way to beat Sylvie is to cut me. So my opponents try to cut me. That's like they're like from round 2, they're like trying to cut me. I tend to go into max guard, which is just like, you know, a 11 guard trying to protect myself, and it's not flexible. I can't actually strike out of it. So the nice thing about the diamond guard is that it fully protects me from elbows, but I can actually strike out of it because it has this like kind of rolling quality to it. And then elbows come out of it really nicely too. So Sao Sing, it's actually Sao Sing's birthday. She's like the queen bee of female fighters in Thailand. She's incredible. She got cut quite a bit. She and I were laughing with each other a couple of years ago about how we're like cut sisters because we both have like scars. But her mom, who's this badass woman who runs the gym, so like the head of the gym is Sao Sing's mom, and she like raised all of these incredible fighters. Her mom told Sao Sing, if these girls are going to be cutting you, the way you stop them is by cutting them back. And it worked. Like elbows from Sao Sing shut that shit down so fast. And the thing with the diamond guard of me being able to elbow out of it is really the way to stop an opponent from elbowing you, is to elbow back. Even if you don't land it, they're like, maybe not. Like, maybe we don't go into that game right now, and I'll kind of back up a bit. So I think it has a lot of promise for my style.
Yeah, you see that principle of like when you want someone to stop doing something, do it back in a lot of those fights. Like people will think that you shouldn't kick with a kicker, but if you're conceding an entire range, then that's a lot worse. And often doing the thing back to them can dissuade them and show them that you're competitive there. What that reminds me of a lot is Rungnarai Kiatmukau. He'll do this thing where, so he's an outfighter. He's a familiar, he wants to extend the distance, so he's not using it so much to close distance, but he'll have his lead hand extended in kind of a long guard, and then the rear hand will be folded over his face, sort of in a boxing cross guard.
Dracula, yeah.
Kind of like a Dracula guard, but he isn't like dipping his head down and keeping it tight. His forearm will be kind of across like his forehead, and I'm doing the motions here, but obviously nobody can see that. But and he's constantly adjusting it. So he will, usually what he does is he'll be like an extra step away, so his opponent needs to close distance in order to land, and he'll use that folded forearm to kind of block like a right hand, or he'll check a kick and then immediately counter with a knee or his right kick. And then
I can see that.
And he's, like I said, he's really versatile, and he can adjust the guard a lot. In his fight with Chanelert Menayathan, they had 2 fights recently. Chanelert he works a lot with his hands, so he's trying to step inside and punch Rungnarai, and Rungnarai would keep the elbow folded across his face on the outside and kind of adjust it up and down to block punches. And then when he got in the inside and tried to hit him with left hooks, Rungnarai would change it to like a more normal high guard. So he'd be transitioning between this cross block and the high guard while circling off, and it was really beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I think that the flexibility in one's guard is something that is yet another thing that has changed a great deal from the golden age to now. Fighters now seem to have like 1 or 2 guards that they go between, and they're effective for the most part. But there's someone that they call the modern elbow hunter. His name is Muay Thai MK or PK. Yeah, Muay Thai PK Sanchai. I wouldn't call him the modern elbow fighter, but they do. His elbows are really cool in that he does 2 things, but it's only 2 things. And it's because people nowadays have very inflexible guards. Basically, he'll push on someone's guard from the outside like this, and so he gets them pushing out against him, and then his elbow comes in. And then once they're like, oh shit, I made the wrong decision, he starts popping from the inside so that they start pushing in, and then he goes to the outside.
Yeah.
So he's just manipulating this guard from the inside and the outside, and then doing exactly the opposite of what he's convinced the person is the solution. But if that person had 3 guards instead of 2 guards, none of those elbows would work. So it's interesting in that like it's totally that like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king kind of thing. Is that like, given the watered down version, someone who has something just outside of that, like, still has this kind of like, you know, magic ability kind of thing. It's just that the level of magic before versus the level of magic now is just kind of different. But there are still fighters who do incredible things. Like Sang Min is like a left kick. Like all he does. And it's incredible. And they put him against like Rafi, who, once he's jabbed has run out of ideas. They're like, it's amazing, Sang Min and his endless left kicks. And you're like, yeah, it's one kick, but he's doing it. Like, it wasn't solved in that fight.
He has some tactics to kind of like set it up too. Like he punches off them well. In the Tao and Chai fights, the first fight, Tao and Chai was kind of catching all his kicks and countering them. And then in the second fight, he kind of started like using them to get to his punches. So Tao and Chai, he would either be long guarding to stop Sang Min's punches or catching the kicks. And then Sang Min would show the kick to get him to drop his hands and then start punching them. That was probably one of my favorite series of fights over the past couple of years.
Yeah, Tao and Chai is like, they call him Muay Femur, but he's really Muay Teeth. Like, he is a teeth. That's what he does. And they're both southpaw. So southpaws have a hard time facing other southpaws for the most part. Tawan Chai actually grew up in my gym. His name was Jadu Kam when he was coming up at Petron. And so my trainer was talking about him prior to that fight. And I was like, what do you think's going to happen with, I called him Jadu Kam, but Tawan Chai versus Sang Min? And he was like, Tawan Chai is amazing if someone's coming towards him. He has a really hard time if he has to turn, if he has to go forward. So he's like, this fight's going to come down to whether Sang Min lets him back up the whole time or whether he's going to make him come forward. And as we know in that first fight, it did not go well for Sang Min. He won by an incredible teeth. But in the next go-around, you saw a complete change to that same situation. It was like, you have something that when you're not accustomed to each other, something works, and that's why rematches in Thailand are a huge deal. People love rematches. I love rematches. I've fought some people, I think, 8-9 times, because you have to adjust to each other. Like, you can't use the same thing that they weren't ready for, in the next one. And that second Sang Min Tawan Chai fight, people were like, I was talking to Diesel Noi and Karahat were in my car. We were driving up to Chiang Mai together. It was like road trip, and we were listening to this horrible disco music that Diesel Noi loved. And they were very excited because that fight was going to happen that night. And Diesel Noi and Karahat both agreed. They're like, there's no way Sang Min can beat Tawan Chai. 1, because he's smaller. 2, because he does not have other Yodmoy at his gym. Tawan Chai is at PK Sanchai. They buy amazing fighters, and so they have a stable of like all amazing fighters who can train together. Sang Min is basically like his only guy at his gym, and then he's got people holding pads for him, and like he doesn't have amazing people to train against. And so they were like, there's no way Tawan Chai is just too big. And then he got slaughtered, and Karahat just shook his head and was like, I can't believe a Yodmoy would lose to body punches. Like, I can't believe this happened. Like,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
What you were saying about guards earlier, when the Dieselnoy and Samart fight came out, I was so amazed at Dieselnoy's guard. The way he was using, like you said, transitioning between a lot of different guards, flashing the Dracula guard briefly to get into the clinch, and especially just like everything he was doing with his arms and shoulders. Like he was almost shoulder rolling like a boxer when Samart would punch him. It was incredible.
Yeah.
And all this while walking him down and constantly just throwing knees over and over.
Oh, Diesel Noi has talked a number of times about how being tall and long is actually really difficult because your balance sucks.
Yeah.
as your body is shaped like that, it's really hard to have balance. And there's not a lot of footage of him, but if you watch the footage that is there of Diesel Noi, he gets punched in the face a lot. Like, his guard is good, but with that height, people punching him in the face is something that they're just going to try to go over it because they know those knees are coming. He was talking, like, it must be 35, 36 years after the fact, and he's still pissed when he talks about Sagat uppercutting him. Like, he still gets mad. He's like, he uppercutted me, and it was the worst, and I went after him with my knees. And it's like, you see this, like, incredible, I didn't see a lot of things landing on him, and then when things did land on him, it seemed to totally not bother him. And then you're looking at Samart, who's just eating knees from Diesel Noi from, like, rounds 4 and 5. I've seen Diesel Noy's knees now at 57 years old, and I'm like, that's through a belly pad, and I don't think anybody wants that. And Samart's just like, let's go get something to eat afterwards. Like, it's insane. It's crazy.
That's insane. You mentioned something about gyms buying up a lot of fighters. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is kind of more of a recent thing, right? Like in the Golden Age, you had more kind of localized gyms. And how do you feel about that trend of having like these mega gyms with a bunch of different fighters in it? Do you think it's good for the sport, or do you think it's kind of harmful in certain ways?
Blanket statement, I don't think it's good. The reason it's not good is because you do not have the best of the best fighting each other because they're all in the same gym together.
Right.
Promoters already, it's the same thing that happens in the U.S. Like, you don't see super fights so much in the UFC because you want to keep your champion kind of unblemished thing. So it's partially that there are fewer gyms in general, and so you can have these gyms that have a lot of power, and so they can buy talent and kind of like fill their stable, and then they also have sway with promoters, so they can get them on the kinds of cards that are going to have title fights and things like this. That's always been the case. Like, you have amazing fighters from the Golden Age who never got belts because they just weren't from big enough gyms. Like, Somrak has no belts.
Yeah.
Fucking what is that? But it's a difficult thing now because of the difference in distribution. You don't get to see as much variety of matchups. Like, you have a couple of stars who don't fight the other couple of stars, but there will be maybe a few rematches between these two gyms, and I think it's difficult to get the kind of amazing one-of-a-kind talent that you used to be able to get in the Golden Age, kind of because they were more homegrown. But it's also really hard to tell. Like, a lot of these amazing fighters were the only ones out of their gym. Like, there's the Hapalong gym that had Chmuk Pet, Panam Tung Lek, and Diesel Noy, like, hanging out and training together. That's incredible. But Diesel Noy was not grown in that gym. Like, he came up and started to become really famous and then went to that gym and actually never fought with their name, but he was there. And then you have someone like Karahat out of the Sorsupawan gym. You don't see other Yodmoy with the Sorsupawan name. He had really, really great people training with him. Manop, who became Sanchai's Padman, he was with Karahat when they were kids at Sorsupawan, but he never became champion. So you'll have little pockets of gyms that had a lot of really incredible fighters. Like Somrak Kam Singh was Jockey Gym, like they were together. And so Jockey Gym produced like a bunch of really amazing fighters who actually were very similar to each other. They're all left-handed, which is really weird. But you'll have little pockets like that, but not in the same way that now you'll see these like mega gyms that have, like 10 fighters that are like just always on these top cards and like
right.
flying everywhere. And I don't know, it's difficult to separate business from Muay Thai in the same way that, like, how awesome is Don King? Like, I don't there's some messed up stuff going on with Don King
yeah,
that, like,
absolutely.
you kind of forget about. That's happening here. There's like lots of mafia involvement in the promotions of the Golden Age of Muay Thai, and you can't separate that. You can't like look at it as like, oh, things were simpler then. Like, no, it was just you had much more powerful individual mafia, and now it's like more spread out or something. But yeah, it's tricky. It's from an ethical standpoint, I'm totally like for the gym that like grows its champions, not for the gym that buys its champions. But at the same time, like, some of those fighters who were grown in a small gym, even though they have the qualities of being Yodmoy, will not become Yodmoy until they go to the big gym that can present them with those opportunities. And I think it's always been that way.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Something I wanted to ask more along the lines of the culture of Muay Thai. In the West, we often divide martial arts into like traditional versus sport arts, where the traditional arts are seen as like ineffective and also culture rich, and the sport ones are seen as more effective and almost kind of devoid of culture. Like, there's this thing in MMA and boxing where there's almost a denial of culture involved in the arts. And Muay Thai is really interesting because it's extremely steeped in culture, both its own culture and the national culture of Thailand, but it's also very geared toward competition. So I know you're very close to the culture of Muay Thai and that you hold it close to you. I've heard you talk about like the role of Muay Thai as almost performative Thai masculinity. And there's also another side of that traditional culture that's exclusionary to women. So I was wondering kind of how you navigate
It's the same
identifying.
side.
Yeah,
That's not. There's another side. That's the same side.
right, exactly. So I was wondering like how you navigate closely identifying with certain parts of a tradition that also works to exclude you.
Oh, it's hard. It's frustrating. It's also really difficult because it's not my home culture.
Right.
So, it's one of these things where some of the most hardcore believers in a religion are people who have converted to it. So people who are raised in Judaism may not be as hardcore as someone who converted to it. I'm a convert, right? Like I didn't grow up in Thailand. I didn't grow up with these things. So part of it is like I super protect and believe in and like stick to elements of the traditional aspect of it as a convert that people have more flexibility in who kind of came up and this is their culture and things like this. There are also elements that are the exact opposite of that, which is like, I don't know that the concept of feminism is familiar to like 90% of the female fighters in Thailand that I would talk to. They say things that totally count into feminism. Like they have these beliefs, but they wouldn't call it that. Like it's not a movement. It's not something this. I went and interviewed Sao Sing, who I was talking about earlier, who is one of the most celebrated, most recognized, most amazing female Muay Thai fighters in Thailand. And she's kind of radical in a lot of ways. Like she came up as a young fighter, which is typical of female fighters in Thailand, is that they start when they're young and they kind of peak when they're young. And then a lot of them stop right around puberty or going to school.
Is that when they stop fighting boys?
A lot of them don't fight boys. Like it's not as common as it sounds. It's like when they're really little, maybe it'll happen in the provinces, but it's not a, like everyone did it kind of thing. The reason that Jija was so amazing is she was doing it on TV. But like a lot of these young women become really good because they're fighting a lot. They become really, really good. Like Loma, who people now know from the UFC, grew up in Asan, fighting in the provinces, just like endless. She's, like really just got a lot of experience. They'll run out of opponents at a certain point, which doesn't actually mean there's no one to fight them. It means that the other side doesn't want to put money on it. Like the odds just don't go, or they don't want to give up weight. Like the reason I've been able to keep fighting and not run out of opponents is because I'll fight up. When there's money on it, people won't put money on a huge weight disparity. So, that's not always an option for people. But Sao Sing, normally these girls will run out of opponents or kind of phase out of it because they go to school, they get a job, or when they hit puberty, their bodies change so radically that they kind of can't fight the way that they did before. Sao Sing had a baby. She had a son when she was like 18, 19 years old, and then came back to Muay Thai. I think she fought again something like 8 months after she gave birth.
Wow.
And she's been fighting since then. And there's a little bit of this whole like, oh, she's not the same as she was before. And it's like there are so many reasons why she would not be the same as she was before. One, she took time off to have a kid, but two, she's older now. Like everybody changes. So she's this like phenomenal, like has just kind of defied lots of odds and kind of had this amazing career that's at once somewhat typical of a female fighter and then kind of surpasses it in this other way. And I was interviewing her a couple of years ago, and I was asking her what she thought about women fighting at Lumpini or Rajadamnern, because this is something that is very protected by the West. Like, white Western men really love to talk about how traditional this is and how old this tradition is. Not that old, not that traditional. But she was like, they will never, ever, ever let women fight at Lumpini. Like, she was hardcore about it. And she had a sadness to her in the way she was saying it. So you could tell that she was like, we should be able to fight there. But she was like, they will never, ever change this rule. Like, it is just too protected in the, like, this is, like, what makes official Muay Thai, whatever. And so dealing with something like that, where you come from the West and you're like, but it's not fair. Like, Thailand doesn't care about fair. Like,
Yeah.
It's not like this thing is that when you stop approaching it from a, like, it should be a meritocracy, I worked so hard, I should be appreciated in the same way. When you stop trying to erase the structure that's there and just start trying to, like, work your way into it or around it, or like, okay, that door's not going to open, I'm going to kind of go in this side way. It's not as like bumping your head against the wall as it can be if you're trying to make everything fair and rational. I 100% believe that women will be fighting at Lumpini. I don't know about Rajadamnern. I think at Lumpini we will. Maybe not in my career, maybe not super soon, but minds change really, really fast. And it's because something is suddenly commercially viable, or something is suddenly very interesting, or suddenly it just becomes a, like, women can't fight at Lumpini? Like, I didn't know that was a thing. Like, my trainer's father, who founded the gym in the 80s, he's this old, like, traditional, super, super conservative dude. Like, the kind of Baran, like, medicine beliefs that he has. Like, he has terrible high blood pressure and is like, fuck you to every doctor because he wants to take his, like, old school medicine. He's, like, hardcore old school dude. He asked me, because I've been at the gym for a while, and I was, like, waiting outside of the gym at 4 a.m. to go to Lumpini with his grandson. And he was like, have you fought at Lumpini yet? Like, he was just completely unaware that women are not yet fighting at Lumpini.
Huh.
And you'll have these white dudes in the West who are like, never, it's totally traditional, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, this dude who's, like, totally into the traditions that make it so that I can't fight there doesn't know, like, that is still a thing. So
yeah, and, like, shitty Western dudes can fight at Lumpini too.
Totally.
Yeah, I can't imagine how hard that is to kind of deal with as someone who's, like, not naturally Thai. So you're coming in as an outsider, and obviously we can't be, like, just shit on the traditions and all that. But at the same time, there's this almost fetishization by the West of that kind of culture. And like you were saying, with the Western men being like, oh no, you can't break this, it's tradition.
Because it doesn't keep them out. That's why they're like, no, you can't. Like, the second you're like, Westerners are not allowed to fight there, they'd be like, that's bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
And there's this barrier to women, while at the same time, like, Lumpini has a ton of, like, nothing prelim cards where, like, shitty Western dudes are fighting. Max Muay Thai is paying shitty Western dudes to fight, and they won't have women there. And it's like, it's crazy.
I fought at Max Muay Thai. They used to have women.
Oh, yeah?
I fought at Max. Yeah.
Is that like a recent change then?
It's a couple of years old. So Max Muay Thai existed for quite a long time, and they had Bukau signed with them. He was, like, the face of Max, but they didn't have a permanent space. They would travel around. Then they built Max Stadium in Pattaya, and that's where it kind of really took off. They got a TV contract. They started having daily fights. When they first built the stadium, maybe, I don't know, 5-6 months into when they had built it, I fought there. I was the first female bout with Mung Sing Jiu, who's actually Sao Sing's cousin. We fought there. And then I think there's been one other female bout. It was like an Argentinian woman and a Thai woman fought there. So there's only been 2 female bouts at the permanent stadium of Max Muay Thai. And then they were like, no women, no kids. They didn't want anyone under, like, 50 kilos or something. It's my suspicion, and again, I can only speak authoritatively on what I think. This is not written anywhere. I can't say this is absolutely what happened. I think that because they're so outside of what traditional Muay Thai is, and they had a little bit of a sketchy time when they first started having fights on TV every day. They were really, really filling their cards, and so they were kind of, like, pulling at less talent than they had when they were only on the weekends.
Yeah.
They started having some really sketchy fights there that looked like show fights. And Ekapop, who they call Hellboy, he had a really weird knockout that everyone was like, that was totally a thrown fight. You're marring the reputation of Max Muay Thai. He got like kicked out and had to
The
come
good
back
reputation
and
of Max
defend
Muay Thai.
himself. It used to have a pretty good reputation. Like, it used
Oh,
to
yeah?
have a, like, this is real Muay Thai. And I think that when it started going in the direction of people being like, this is not traditional, this is kind of show fighting, in order to legitimate themselves, to make themselves seem more real and more like traditional and more authority, they're like, no women. Like, that's the way to make yourself really real, is to be like, no women. And so they now no longer let women fight there, but they did before, and I fought there.
Well, hopefully, like you said, as attitudes kind of change, that we can look forward to Thailand becoming more open to it. Yeah, I've always thought it was really weird that they don't have, there's like no barrier to Western men fighting there, but they don't even let like the elite Thai women.
Yeah, it's because it became something that gamblers were interested in seeing. Like, it the Western men who are fighting there think that it's because they've achieved what the Thai fighters who fight there have achieved. They think that it's the same thing, and it's not. It's kind of a novelty.
Mm-hmm.
There are some very, very good Western men who fight there. This is not a like blanket statement, but there are some like him. This dude at my gym who totally sucks can fight at either of those stadia no problem, and I can't go. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a couple of wrap-up questions, who is a fighter that, like a legend that you would like to train with that you haven't had a chance yet?
Wang Chinoy.
Oh, I was just gonna ask after this, that I was gonna say Wang Chinoy is probably my favorite Nak Muay of all time, and if you were in contact with him and you've thought about doing a session with him.
I think about it all the time. I actually harass Karahat to help me all the time. There are a lot of obstacles, like we talked about when we first started. These guys are not always in wonderful situations. Not all of them are in gyms. If they are in gyms, they're not of the greatest health or sobriety all the time. He's been a little bit difficult. I think that we will get Wang Chinoy, but he's been a little bit difficult just to get to that point. But I'm very like, I want this, so I keep working towards it. I also really want Olay. He's really far away and hard to get to. I have made initial contact, and I think that the way to get to him is actually to maybe get Diesel Moy to help me or something like that. But he's way down in the south at a gym, and he seems actually to be in really good health and would make a really good session. And Sam Kaur is in Hong Kong. And I've contacted him, and he's just not in Thailand very often. So I told him, when you come back to Thailand, let me know. I'd like to get Sam Kaur. And who else was I waiting for? Chumuk Pet's brother, Panam Tunglek, is in Tokyo, which is also where Chumuk Pet is.
I didn't know they were brothers.
Yeah. So Panam Tunglek's little brother, and he will be coming back for his visa eventually. I'm gonna try to grab him when he comes. But those are like my top of the list right now.
Hopefully those pan out. I'd be super interested in seeing all of them. Since you already mentioned Wang Chinoy, I'll ask about
like
Veer
I'm gonna be so nervous. Right? Like when I see Wang Chinoy, I'm just gonna be so nervous. I probably won't even be able to like get the video done. I'll just be like.
Do you get that like starstruck thing with everybody? Like, it must be amazing being around so many legends of the sport.
I've gotten better at it, I think. I hope I've gotten better at it over time. But like when I was first starting, there were some really hard ones. When I first met Nam Kabuan, he was making a really, really big deal about me making eye contact, which I can't do as a person. To do it as a fighter, and it's something that I've actually worked on and have made a whole thing out of it. I think it's actually truly incredible. But at the time, when he was like, you have to look me in the eyes and you have to do this while we're like doing this training, I honestly was like, sir, you are too handsome. I cannot look at you. I'm just going to stare at the floor and get through this. And now we're buddies. Like now, we talk and we can hang out and we like, make jokes with each other and stuff like that. Now I can look him in the eye while making fun of him. But at the time that I was filming that, it was like not No way. But I think with Wong Chinoy, I would just be so nervous. And some of these people, like Sagat, I really like Sagat. Like he's a very, very cool guy. It is like being in an enclosed space with a tiger, and when he hits you, he's barely touching you. Like he's just demonstrating where you're supposed to be hitting, and somehow it still hurts so bad that you're like, please don't ever touch me. Like, it's just horrifying. We have a guy at our gym right now, Ajahn Gimyu. He's not a champion, but he trained champions. So he was the one who trained Lock Hin for the 3 fights against Samson. Lock Hin is scary as shit. Like he is just like, again, like tiny dude. When he's coming at you, you're like, that was just entirely too close to me. Like, don't do that. Ajahn Gimyu is 78 years old. He was in a motorbike accident like 10, 15 years ago, and is just, I think he weighs a little bit more than I do. Like he's a very frail looking dude, but still really like, I think he just lives on anger and like stubbornness. He was punching me in the stomach while I was kneeing him to like condition me, or like, I don't know what he was trying to teach me about, like,
or just to be sadistic.
I have never been hit so hard in my life as from a 78-year-old man who was like digging his knuckles into my ribs. Oh my god! Like I had to excuse myself from the ring when I was finally like had finished my rounds. I lied to him and got out of the ring and went and was like, I might cry in the bathroom. Amazing.
Have you ever tried to get a Veerpal for a session?
I have. He said that he's just working in his restaurant up in Chayapum, which is where he is. I think that I might have a better chance of getting him now. He's actually started integrating himself a little bit into a local gym up there, kind of making cameos for a fighter that was getting ready for a fight that was canceled because of COVID, but that fight will happen when fights start again. So I think that my chances with Weerapon are increasing. And then Lam Namoon, very unfortunately, went to Singapore for like a 2-3 year contract or something like that. But I definitely want to get Lam Namoon. He's way up in Ubon, so he's been difficult to get to. But when he comes back, maybe I can get a fight up there and get Lam Namoon as well, because he's just unreal. I love Lam
Namoon. Yeah.
Yeah.
So finally, do you have anything you'd like to promote? Do you have anything coming out soon? And you guys should all subscribe to Sylvie's Patreon. She has hundreds of sessions with legends of Muay Thai, and it's amazing to just see the way they move and the way they teach. It's easily the best resource for anyone who can't actually go down there and train themselves. So I'd highly recommend that.
Yeah. I would say 100% check out Patreon. Even if you just like take a look at it, even for just $1, you can get access to some pretty incredible things. But the library is almost 100 hours of long form instruction. The thing about my method and kind of what I'm doing with the library, and we call it Preserve the Legacy. Again, like I said at the start of the show, it's not only preserving the techniques of these amazing, we have legends, crews, current fighters, ex-fighters teaching their technique. It's preserving the technique, but it's also preserving these men who are just really, really incredible people. And it truly is a library, in that there's just so much to go through. And one of the reasons we do long form instead of like breaking everything down into like highlight videos or breakdowns or individual technique is that that would be like kind of learning a language by vocabulary alone instead of actually like reading Nabokov or something. Like the way that someone uses their technique is so telling and expressive of who they are. Mm-hmm. So when I first started doing the library, people often ask me, do you find it confusing to have one teacher teach you this way and another person teach you that way, and then like you can't do them at the same time because they actually conflict with each other? And it's actually not confusing at all, because it's basically like using synonyms. Like you know when to call something a rock or when to call it a stone because it just sounds right, but they kind of mean the same thing. And that's one of the beautiful things about the library, is that because someone is showing their style. They're not like, this is how you kick. This is how Karahat kicks, and this is how, so this is how Silipatai kicks, and actually kicked the shit out of Karahat this way. Is that it works into their entire personality and their entire kind of program as a person and as a fighter, and it just makes sense. You're like, I totally understand why Yod Kunpan would say don't lean back on that knee, is because he's going to knee you 500 times. Whereas Karahat's like, yeah, lean back on the knee, because he's just throwing the one that's like going to spear you into the corner, and then he's coming for his head kick or whatever. So Patreon has the library, but it also has documentary projects. We have the Watch With Me of the Dieselnoy versus Samart, Dieselnoy versus Samart Holy Grail fight, which is Dieselnoy talking about it while we're watching it and talking about the weigh-in. We did the same with Nam Kabun fighting Deckers. So there's tons of stuff in there that, honestly, there's so much in there that it's a little bit like I can't even tell you everything that's there. So just go have a look and get lost in it, because it's like a rabbit hole of Thailand's best Muay Thai.
Absolutely. Check out Sylvie's Patreon, and check out Patreon, the Fight Site's Patreon at patreon.com/thefightsite. Thank you so much for coming on, Sylvie. I had a great time.
Thank you for having me and for thinking so wonderfully about Muay Thai. These are such interesting topics. It's great.
All right, until next time. Bye, guys.
Their hands and feet and balls and knees. This is an art of boxing you would all love to learn. Ooh-ah. You may be small, no need to fear. Strike right and left with your own bows and with your knees. Now suck them hard with your soul and then kick out and on.